I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And today we're talking about futuristic space western cartoon Bravestarr, which was the last cartoon ever produced by Filmation, who I think it's fair to say most famous for making He-Man and She-Ra. And I'm not really aware of any other cartoons of theirs, such as Filmation's Ghostbusters, that actually made it onto TV screens in this country. I gather that Star Trek, the animated series, which Filmation did, was on telly over here at some point. But certainly the only things we ever watched by them in the late 80s and early 90s were He-Man, She-Ra, and Bravestarr. And Bravestarr was originally on American television in the autumn, sort of September onwards, 1987, and the early part of 1988. It's a single season of 65 episodes, which is a lot of episodes to fill. Why you get, like in He-Man and She-Ra, indeed, some varying quality in episodes. And Filmation, the company, folded sometime in 1989, and Bravestarr really was their last cartoon that they managed to get out successfully. And they did have a toy line to go with it, but it wasn't as extensive as the Masters of the Universe toy line. I don't remember ever seeing any of it in Toys R Us or the second-hand shop. Young Ones, where I got all my He-Man figures. So it wasn't really in the soup like He-Man. But nevertheless, it was on the CBBC, in the late 80s and early 90s. I'm not sure exactly when we used to watch it, but I'd be very surprised if, like Fantastic Max, it hadn't crept into the early 90s with repeats, and that's really where we remember it from. I remember it used to be on sometimes on Saturday mornings before going live at like 9 o'clock. I'm sure it used to be on the CBBC in the afternoons as well. Really, its main USP, and what made me like it and remember it, and caused me to say, oh, I like this cartoon so much, I'm going to buy these American VHSs in 2003, was the 4 animal powers, which Bravestarr, the title character, possessed, or perhaps more accurately, were channeled through him by these 4 spirit animals. And we shall talk quite extensively about those 4 powers as we go through, I expect. Whenever and this hasn't happened very often, but whenever I've mentioned to anyone in an email or instant messaging or something, do you remember Bravestarr? What they remember is inevitably, oh, he had the strength of a bear and the speed of a puma and things like that. And that is the thing that sticks out and is remembered, and really, yes, it's the USP. So as I say, I bought these videos in 2003, and I must have liked them sufficiently to buy several more videos from the darkest depths of the internet, sellers on Amazon and things, over the 6 years after that. And one of the first things I thought when I watched Bravestarr again for the first time in what definitely more than 10 years, probably something like 12, 13 years, was, oh, it looks more like He-Man with the animation than I remembered. But having watched more of it and discussed it with Rosie, I do think it falls short of He-Man in many ways. It's very like He-Man in many ways, not only in its look, but it's not quite as well realised as He-Man in terms of plot and characters and style and whole setup. And it's just a bit like trying to do something similar to He-Man, but not quite making it in any important aspect. I was thinking earlier, actually, and I hadn't really thought about this before, how the setup of the planet where it's set, New Texas, is rather like the He-Man setup on Eternia, or indeed the She-Ra setup on Etheria. You've got your base for your goodies, which on Bravestarr is Fort Kerium, the mining settlement, and that's like the city of Eternos in He-Man, principally the Royal Palace, where the main protagonist protagonists live, and the Whispering Woods and the Kingdom of Bright Moon in She-Ra. And then you've got, in Bravestarr, the Hexagon, where your baddies live, your principal usually featured baddies, which is equivalent to Snake Mountain in He-Man and the Fright Zone in She-Ra. And then you've also got, in Bravestarr, Star Peak, which is the equivalent of Castle Grayskull in He-Man or the Crystal Castle in She-Ra. And there lives your big magic mentor character who your main protagonist will go to when they're having problems like, oh, my animal powers are gone, oh, my sword's broken. And of course, in Bravestarr, that is Shaman, and in He-Man and Castle Grayskull, it's the Sorceress, and in She-Ra, in the Crystal Castle, it's Light Hope, which I thought was quite an interesting comparison between the whole setup of the various things. Has that ever occurred to you at all?
No.
But it's true, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
Well, the basic premise of Bravestarr is that this planet, New Texas, is rich in the mineral cerium, which is this shiny, sparkly red stuff. And this is the rarest and most valuable element in the universe because it has a lot of energy stored in it. And you'll see them in the series using cerium as fuel for their guns and little portable campfires and spaceships. Spaceships are called cerium freighters.
So actually it's more useful than gold, which has inspired it with the gold rush of the Wild West. Gold is just valuable on Earth because everybody says it is. But cerium actually has a use.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? The cerium rush, which is mentioned in the opening narration, yes, as you say, is the gold rush very much, but yes, it's a useful version of it. And they do also use cerium as currency, like gold. So it crops up quite a lot in the show.
Like in the olden days when people used to use potatoes as currency. Other useful things to eat and heat your home.
And you can see in the Origin movie how Tex Hex is the only one, or he's not Tex Hex then, he's just Tex, the only one who knows that this planet is rich in cerium and he's exploiting that, and he drops this tiny piece into the engine of the spaceship and says it'll keep this ship powered through all the next year. And we say, that's why it's so valuable. And he double crosses his partner, Angus McBride, who turns up later in the show.
Is he Scottish?
Yes.
Oh, good.
And when the galactic rescue ship comes to rescue McBride, the richness of New Texas, full of cerium, is revealed to the universe, and so the mining settlement for cerium is set up there. And it's implied, I think, various episodes of the series, there has been other human habitation there before, in places such as Dust City, for example. But in recent times, for a few hundred years or something, there hasn't been humans there, and now there is again. And obviously, as the opening narration says, the cerium rush brought outlaws by the score. That's Tex Hex and his gang, who we'll go over in a bit. So what do you need in order to combat outlaws? The people of Fort Cerium need a galactic marshal. Actually, they wanted an army of marshals, but the Galactic Council sent one, Marshal Bravestarr, knowing that he would be enough, chiefly because of his 4 great animal powers, which he didn't have full control over at that point when he was at the Marshal Academy, like Harry Potter at the zoo, but then Shaman helps him to get full control over them in a mystic ceremony once they've met up again on New Texas. But that's all in the Origin movie. And there we are, a well-defined and quite interesting setup, like you get on He-Man, but it just isn't so vividly realised in the end result. So what we'll do in a moment is just go through the actors and the main characters they play, and say what we think about them, and then discuss the few episodes which we've been watching recently in preparation for this podcast, and say some of the good points and bad points about them. And perhaps I'll say now that I've always thought, and I think Rosie is certainly on board with this now, that an aspect of a good episode an important aspect, is one that makes good and imaginative and careful use of the 4 animal powers. It's very easy for a lazy writer to say, oh, well, chuck in a strength of the bear here, chuck in a speed of the puma there for a bit of variety, but the very best episodes, well-crafted episodes, use a variety of powers in some interesting and appropriate situations, including the lesser used eyes of the hawk and ears of the wolf.
Yes, I think when I was young, that was chiefly what I wanted to see. I don't remember much about what I thought of Bravestarr and engaging with it on a deeply personal and emotional level. The most insightful thing I thought as a child was, oh, he's a cowboy and an Indian. I guess that's because it's sort of space and future and different cultures have come together, which was very intelligent of me when I was like 5, I think.
That's a very important aspect of the show, and something I spotted as well, yes, when I were young. I remember the bubble bath, Bravestarr bubble bath, had white skin. We were both very unimpressed with that.
That's ridiculous. That's so racist. And also as a child, I liked 3030, who is a character we'll talk about in some more detail, but basically he's a horse, and I liked him because I liked animals, so I always would say that he was my favourite, I think. So that's what I remember as a child. I think I quite wanted to see the powers. I know I wanted to see 3030 doing what he does. And I noticed he was a cowboy and an Indian and came up with a quite insightful reason why. But I didn't think about the wider implications of the different cultures and races and species and that kind of thing, which I find very interesting now. And I think those ideas are a bit better than perhaps the cartoon itself, and they could have been more fully and interestingly explored.
It's in there, isn't it? But it's just not quite fully realised. I think He-Man and She-Ra get a lot closer to realising their potential with that sort of thing. So now we'll talk about who's in it, or whose voices are in it, and who they play and what we think of them. Now, coming over from He-Man, you really have 3 voice actors. Not surprisingly, Lou Scheimer, the Filmation president, and his daughter Erica Scheimer. Now, they don't have any really regular main characters in Bravestarr, either of them. They do tertiary main characters and additional voices, which is unlike He-Man, where Lou Scheimer voiced a lot of the characters regularly, and Erica Scheimer had a lot of voicing of female characters to do in She-Ra, particularly, and she also did some voice of He-Man.
She's very good at boys, isn't she?
Yes. But one thing Lou and Erica do is the opening narration. Lou Scheimer does all the talking. Planet of New Texas floats deep in space, etc., sounding very like King Randor, which I guess is something like his normal voice.
Sort of patriarchal, epic adventure sounding voice.
That's exactly it. And Erica Scheimer does all the singing bits of Bravestarr and singing about the powers.
And I don't wish to offend Erica Scheimer, but it was only within the last few days Jake confirmed for me whether that was a man or a woman doing those vocals, because I was never sure.
And she does have quite a deep voice, which is why it's very well suited to doing, as you say, boy characters, which she does to good effect on He-Man and She-Ra, and also in Bravestarr. There's this semi-regular Fort Carrium child called Wild Child, who was raised by dingoes. Eric Scheimer voices very well, I think. We're watching him now today.
And he's of Native American Indian origin, isn't he, I think?
Yes, possibly not from the same tribe as Bravestarr and Shaman. In the origin movie, it seems that they come from a different planet which blew up. But then, often in the flashbacks of young Bravestarr and Shaman, you'll see the 3 sons of New Texas in there. And they kind of think it's New Texas, so it's a bit confusing.
I reckon quite a lot of planets have been colonised by Earth, and Native American cultures are more widespread than perhaps at the moment it seems like they might end up, because they are so marginalised. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
And Erica does do some young girls in the show as well, and women, but I think her voice best suited to these boy characters, as I said in the Master of the Universe podcast. So that's when she's at her best. Erica also voices the school teacher, Miss Jenny, in one episode that I've got, and then in another episode that I've got, Miss Jenny's being voiced by their main woman, we'll talk about in a bit, so nobody's quite sure who's supposed to be doing her voice. And, yeah, Lou Scheimer picks up any voice work that's needed for random carrion prospectors. I guess his main tertiary character that he does is Doc Clayton, who is also from a kind of Native American tribe by the look of him. And in one episode he's not a very good doctor. I expect he'll be up and about in a few days, but he has no idea.
And he hasn't even got a diagnosis, has he? Just leave him in bed and tell him he expects he'll be up and about in a few days.
But there's an episode where he features quite prominently, Doc Clayton, which I watched on YouTube, where a mercenary comes after him and then decides not to come after him after all because he was innocent. And that was the one that I always remembered as very exciting because it made good use of all four powers and had all four zoom into the face, activate the power animations, which is very rare to see. So there we are, Lou and Erica came over from He-Man and did any bits of filling in that they needed, but the main cast members we will talk about now. One of them comes from He-Man, but we won't talk about him first. We'll first talk about Pat Fraley, who was the voice of Bravestarr. And the main other thing I know from is the Turtles, where he voices Krang, and Baxter Stockman, and various other characters, undoubtedly. But his Bravestarr voice is very good and very suitable, and almost up to the quality of John Irwin and his He-Man voice for carrying the show, but not quite in that top caliber, but it's very good. And I'm particularly impressed with Pat Fraley's Bravestarr, how he does the voice of young Bravestarr, and then there was a bit where there was a flashback to Bravestarr at Marshall's Academy, where he had an in-between Bravestarr voice, almost completely grown up and ready to be a Marshall, but not quite. And he sounded between young Bravestarr and fully grown up Bravestarr. So I think Pat Fraley with his Bravestarr voice took a great deal of care, much more than the animation department ever did with anything, and obviously put a lot into the role. I'm rather impressed with his young boy voice, which they usually get the women to do. You can hear him doing other young boy characters in the show, such as the son, Mark, in an episode that we watched that Rosie enjoyed. So it's not just Erica Scheimer. They've got young boy voices at their fingertips in that show. What do you think of Bravestarr as a character and as a lead character? Apart from the fact that it's good that he's a cowboy and an Indian.
Well, apart from that, I think he's very similar to He-Man in the fact that he knows right from wrong and is a huge driving moral force in the whole setup, and everything would fall apart without him. And in the voice work, you really get what he's thinking and feeling about situations that he's in, if he has a moral dilemma, for instance. So I suppose he's everything a hero ought to be.
And who else does Pat Fraley voice in terms of main characters? You'll hear all these guys voicing random dingoes when necessary, including Lou Scheimer, Pat Fraley, and all the other men we're about to talk about. Even Erica Scheimer, I think, here voicing random dingoes in a deep voice sometimes.
Aren't any of them women?
No, they're all male, the dingoes, because there's only 2 or 3 character designs. Can't be bothered making any more. But whenever they need a extra villain or two to be working with Tex Hex or whoever the guest villain is, or just on their own, they'll get some random dingoes.
So the dingo bitches must stay at home and make the soup and stuff.
Yeah.
Have the babies.
But the other main characters that Pat Fraley voices are Cactus Head and Thunderstick, 2 members of Tex Hex's evil or carrion-hungry gang, which you can sometimes see referred to as the Carrion Bunch if you read about them, but I've never heard that on the show. And Thunderstick is the only villain apart from Tex Hex, who I had any notion of there being in the show from when I watched it first time round. When I got those videos in '03 and there were all these other characters that were supposedly in the gang, I thought, cripes, who are all these? I have no memory of any of them. Except, as I say, Thunderstick, who's this Western, Wild West style robot with a sonic cannon for an arm. And Cactus Head is a strange character who Rosie decided the other day that she doesn't like at all. He's just a weird robot with a cactus for a head.
Yes, it doesn't make any sense. New Texas seems to have some creatures that are mostly robot and partly organic. Another one is that bird thing. What's it called?
Two-Face.
Two-Face, of course, and it has two heads and they don't get on with each other, basically, like Too Bad and He-Man. And I don't understand it at all. It's like someone's built a bird robot and left space for a second head and then put a real bird's head in the space. I don't understand that.
We'll talk about that episode in a bit, in some detail. Well, a little detail. When Shaman is introducing the villains to us in his parade of villains narration in the origin movie,
Sort of like the evil forces of Skeletor.
He introduces Cactus Head to us as the matter-changing menace, but I haven't seen him doing much matter-changing on the show, although I have seen him do a little bit. There's this bit where he's in the desert in disguise as a cactus, and his legs have matter changed into like yellow sand, and I think, oh yes, I guess that's why he's matter changed. But a strange character, that. The next actor to talk about is Ed Gilbert, who has or had a very rich, deep, bronchial voice, very striking voice, and did a lot of cartoon work. And he's one of these people with a very rich, deep bronchial voice who passed away from lung cancer some years later. Surprising when you hear his voice. And the character he voices most often is 3030, Bravestarr's horse partner, work partner, not life partner, deputy, or one of them, sidekick, and basically the second most kind of featured character in the show. Now, his species is equestroid, kind of robot horse, as you might suppose. He's mostly horse, isn't he? But he has robotic limbs, which change, or the front ones do, from hands to hoofs when necessary. And I'm not sure if the equestroids are meant to be native to New Texas, but they certainly were there before the current settlers came, because there's this ancient or quite old structure called the Hall of the Equestroids, where 3030 lives to start with, and he's seemingly the last of his race. So I don't know if they've always been there, or if they've been left there by other human settlers in the past and have gone kind of wild. Do they naturally have robotic parts? It seems they must do if they've been there on their own. 3030's been there on his own, like Tao, for so long. Not Tao has robotic parts.
So do they reproduce sexually and be born with robotic parts? I can't understand that sort of thing.
Nobody really knows, and there's no real clues in the show. The god of the Equestroids, Equus, who Shaman talks to in an episode about 3030, is a complete horse. So I don't know if that gives us any clues. But with the name of the species being Equestroid, you would think they'd always had some sort of robotic aspect to them, at least since the species was named.
Are they descended from Earth horses? In the same way that our cat is descended from the Smilodon.
And they grow their robotic parts at puberty or something, I was wondering. But there we go. It's up to the viewer to decide, and perhaps the viewer can't be bothered to decide, but just wants to enjoy 3030 regardless. And he is very enjoyable.
As I say, he was my favourite when I was a child. Watching Jake's videos, I thought, oh, he can be a bit of an arse, actually. He's very violent and trigger-happy. He's got this massive gun called Sarah Jane, who he uses at the drop of a hat, and doesn't always want to think about the right thing to do like Bravestarr does, so I wasn't keen on that aspect of personality, but then you were explaining to me, weren't you, how in that sense he's like a sort of Wild West Mustang wild horse that you have to go out into the country and lasso to get your horse, and you have to break it and that kind of thing, and that's the wild part of his personality.
That's it. He can be a bit insensitive and tactless. He's a bit brash. He's a bit thoughtless. But he has the goodest, strongest, bravest, noblest heart underneath that you could want. So that's why he's always a hero, even though he does have these obvious shortcomings for dealing with people. But of course, he learns from Bravestarr in that respect, and Bravestarr learns from 3030 in many ways, and they make a good partnership. It always used to make me laugh when Bravestarr's going to 3030, "Yah, giddy up," and things. And it's like, you could talk to him normally, you always do. Not really, just of course. When he goes, "Yah," and 3030 goes, "Boy, you got some nerve." And we'll probably talk some more about how those aspects of 3030's character can be good parts of various episodes when we talk about the episodes we've watched. Ed Gilbert's other really, really main character is Shaman, who I've mentioned a lot. Bravestarr's mentor. He apparently has been looking after Bravestarr since he was quite young. Don't know what happened to his parents, probably ran off to the jungle and got lost. And Shaman's been like mother and father to him, as Bravestarr says so many times. And teacher, spiritual and practical teacher. And they spent some years apart while Bravestarr was at the Martial Academy, where Shaman sent him off to in the escape pod when their planet was exploding. And then they meet up again later on New Texas, and Shaman becomes his sorceress / light hope mentor kind of character. And I think they get some good scenes and episodes out of Shaman. I think Ed Gilbert does a wonderful, wise old Native American voice for him with his rich bronchial tones. And I did find Shaman a very memorable character, because I like that sort of character. He's an old man with white hair and magic powers. We know I like those.
Yes, I don't think I did really remember Shaman. I knew that he existed because he used to be in our games we would play, I think. But I didn't remember him at all from the show. But then I saw your videos, and yes, he is pretty cool, and he does sort of act as an equalizer between the cowboy and Indian aspect of the show and of Bravestarr himself. Of course, the four powers, hawk, wolf, puma, and bear, are sort of Native American spirit animals, aren't they? Which I didn't really realise as a child, and I think that's quite cool now. And he uses those, Bravestarr does, to be, in a sense, a cowboy and a fighter for justice.
Yes, all his cowboy things that you see, obviously, like his hat and his guns and things, he got from the Marshall's Academy.
And all his Indian spirituality and that kind of thing pretty much comes from the shaman.
He gets out his neutralizer in the film and says to Shaman, "I have weapons." Shaman says, "Mere toys. Put them away." So Shaman very much is, as you say, the Indian side.
And then you really see the amalgamation of the two cultures in Bravestarr.
Indeed.
So yes, the shaman is very cool.
And when the occasion calls for it, he'll get into the fray and use his magic powers against the bad guys as well. You see that in some episodes, and in many episodes, you see him sitting at Starfleet, and Bravestarr will go to him and say, "Shaman, I've had an argument with 3030. Shaman will show him a vision from Bravestar's past. This reminds me of when you were a young one, Bravestarr."
Everything reminds him of that.
Everything reminds him of that. And there's always a lesson to remind Bravestarr of from when he was young.
I don't know if maybe real Native American Indians would find that kind of thing offensive or not. Maybe some of them do and some of them don't. You'd have to ask them.
In some episodes, Bravestarr remembers flashbacks with Shaman without Shaman having to be there and remind him. It's quite interesting. It shows he's learned a lot and remembered a lot from Shaman. Like when he and Prospector are trapped in this cave, and he remembers Shaman telling him the river hides his face in the summer. but he is there underground, still alive. So Bravestarr bashes a big hole in the cave and floods it so they can get out. So Shaman, a very important presence in the show, and a very, very good character, one of my favourites always. Ed Gilbert seems to be voicing a lot of the random dingoes and random guest villains and characters when I hear him. I guess his other main characters are Sandstorm and Angus McBride, who I mentioned earlier. Now, Sandstorm is one of Tex Hex's gang, and he's this red kind of reptilian thing. And when I watched the videos originally in 2003, I thought, oh, he's very much the sort of thing you get on He-Man. If I had any memory of him, I probably thought he was in He-Man. But he has sleep sand and sand-blowing powers and things like that. And I did find him quite interesting, because in a couple of episodes he seemed to want to go off and do things on his own and do things for himself without Tex Hex. There's this one called Jeremiah and the Prairie People, where he's off after a lost carrion mine, Sandstorm is. He doesn't want anyone else to know anything about it. And even in the one we watched with Sandstorm in it, he was off doing something without telling Tex Hex, and he wanted to bring him some slaves. He wanted to bring Tex some slaves in order to ingratiate himself, but, you know, he was off doing things by himself. So a bit of a renegade, perhaps, Sandstorm.
I never remembered Sandstorm or any villains except Tex Hex and another one who we'll talk about.
Like me. You didn't remember Thunderstick.
It's a different one.
And yes, Angus McBride, he's Ed Gilbert's other main character, I suppose, or secondary main character. And you see him in the origin movie getting double-crossed by Tex Hex and falling off a cliff. And evidently this causes him to lose feeling in his legs because he rides around in this turbo saddle later on, which is a bit like a turbo mule, which they all drive around. It's their horses, as it were, these mechanical horse-like things, turbo mules. And this turbo saddle, he always sits in it and goes around because he can't walk. And he runs the newspaper on New Texas. 20 years in the newspaper business, and the main thing is that he is Judge JB's father.
She's the woman, isn't she? And I always remembered that there was a woman with a cowboy hat on, but I never remembered her name or what the point of her was.
So normally when you see McBride, he'll be being JB's father. You see them at home in an episode that I've got on a tape, and there's a woman there who's obviously Angus's wife. And I think, oh, is that JB's mother? And then JB is calling her Commander. And you think, oh, well, you don't normally call your mother Commander, do you? It's probably a stepmother. As indeed it is, as I found out in the episode on YouTube where she turns up. Yes, I guess 30-30 Shaman, Sandstorm, and McBride are Ed Gilbert's four main characters, but he does a heck of a lot of other voices. If you can spot him. That Angus McBride voice, you can hear him doing pretty much exactly that, except I think it's more Irish than Scottish, in Peter Pan and the Pirates, as Smee, which Rosie was watching some of a while ago, and we were discovering it wasn't as good as we thought it probably should be.
A bit like Bravestarr.
Yes, but Ed Gilbert certainly adds a lot to these shows anyway, despite their other shortcomings. Next cast member to talk about, we might as well do the woman, who we were talking about, JB, and she was...
Oh, I know her name.
Still is.
Susan Blue.
Yes.
And I found it interesting to see that she was the voice of Judge JB and probably some other women, because I knew the name as the voice director of Extreme Ghostbusters.
Yes, you see, about 10 years later, she'd moved on to being a voice director.
Like screen actors move on to being screen directors. That's very interesting.
And she's also the voice director of the cartoon adaptation of The Mummy, Secrets of the Magi, which we will be talking about later in the year, incidentally.
So she must be a very good voice director then, because they're well done, those shows.
But there she was in the late 80s. She'd already been on Visionaries, which we've mentioned a couple of times in these things.
Another thing where the ideas are better than the show itself, for me anyway.
She played Galadriel in that. But in Bravestarr, yes, she's basically the woman. Now, Erica Scheimer, as I was saying, comes in and helps her with some women. But mainly, she does boys, Erica, because that's what she's good at. So Susan Blue is the woman, basically. And yes, her principal role, obviously, is Judge J.B., who was a character I remembered. She comes to New Texas at the same time as Bravestarr to help sort it out and keep the peace. She's a galactic judge. She has a courthouse. She tells Bravestarr he can't arrest people without proof, and they have sexual tension, like on NYPD Blue. And she has this weapon, the Hammer of Justice, which was given to her by the Prairie people, who we'll discuss in a minute, which she also uses as a gavel. And she sometimes gets involved in the fighting and the sorting out and things, and I always remembered her as a character I didn't really like. And I like her more having watched the videos, but I think she does be forced to fall into the trap of being one of those strong female women who's a bit unpleasant for no reason, just to show that she's strong at times.
I don't think I really engaged with her as a child, I'm afraid. In those episodes you showed me that you liked, she wasn't in many of them, was she?
No.
But then she had quite a large role in that one that was like NYPD Blue. Bravestarr wanted to arrest people and detain people because he knew that they were criminals without any proof, which they do on NYPD Blue, don't they? They just decide who's done the crime. But anyway, I thought she had quite a good role in that because she did get grumpy, but it was because they were having a professional disagreement and she was trying to do her job right, so she wasn't just being arsey for the sake of it. And I thought they did the ship between them quite well, where they were having this professional disagreement and then they were going to sort things out, and Bravestarr was saying he was going to buy her dinner, and then at the end they're flirting and he's saying, do you have any proof? I said, I'd buy you dinner, and I said, didn't I? Well, she's got a witness.
30-30.
He heard that. Yeah, I thought that was pretty good. It didn't seem too forced, like the main man and the woman, and they have to have a ship, like can sometimes happen. So that one episode that she had a role in, I thought she was good, and I can't remember really what she does in any other episodes.
She's unimpressed in the origin movie where he says to her, gee, you sure are pretty to be a judge, or something like that.
That's a bit sexist.
But that's when she's wearing a silly girly dress. The Prairie people give her proper costume as well.
I remember the bit where they haven't met each other yet, and she comes along and bends over and he's perving at her arse.
He wakes up and sees it there and goes, ooh. So yes, they have a ship anyway. I think one episode that was using JB quite well was another one that we watched, which we mentioned before briefly, which is The Ballad of Sarah Jane. She was being used as the voice of reason in that. She was explaining to 3030 why it's dangerous for children to have guns, and she was explaining to the goat man, who we'll talk about a bit more later, why just telling his son not to use guns wasn't enough to make him realise the full implications of what guns, weapons really are and what they do. That was some good use of JB. Another kind of main tertiary woman character who she does is Marley, the stagecoach driver. She needs someone riding shotgun with her, doesn't she?
Yeah, she's Calamity Jane and Rattlesnake all in one, but you need someone to drive the stage and someone to shoot the people who are coming to rob it. Now, if it were exactly the same as Calamity Jane and such things, it would be prairie people coming to rob them, and we'll tell you all about the prairie people soon, I think. But it's not, because the prairie people are not antagonists like the Indians in these rather older American films.
Yes, stage is always getting robbed, usually by his Hex and his gang, or by guest antagonists sometimes.
Or some dingoes?
Yes, random dingoes if they really need it robbed. And as Marley says in the origin movie, I'm getting tired of my stage being robbed every day. And we're like, well, get used to it. It's going to happen all through the series. Maybe not every day, just when she's in it. And the other main-ish woman is Vipra. It wasn't in any of the episodes I showed Rosie.
No, I don't know who that is.
But she's a kind of snake woman. And she has this gun sort of thing that's shaped like a snake, and its tongue comes out and it venomizes you, paralyzes you. And she's just one of the members of Tex-X's gang, and they occasionally use her in an episode. She has a sort of snake voice, Viper, fix you, sort of thing.
Is she a phallus to show that female sexuality is dangerous?
Well, I suppose she is. She's the main female baddie. She's the embodiment of female sin. So there we are. But I never had any memory of Viper. Again, she's the sort of thing I expect to see on He-Man. I guess she's a bit like Whiplash or something like that. Or Cobra Khan, because he has venom like she does.
He is a sort of snake thing too.
Yes. But there she is. That's one of Sue Blue's other main roles. And you will hear her doing boy voices. As I say, I don't think they're as good as Erica Scheimer's. I think they sound like a woman doing a voice. She does her best, doesn't she? She was doing... Oh, I tell you who she was doing quite well. The Goat Boy.
Oh, was that her?
In that episode. Gurmy.
And she had to sort of bleat whilst doing the lines. That was very good.
The way she bleated kind of covered the fact that her voice was quite feminine, I thought. It sounded like a young goat boy. But yeah, you'll hear her around doing women and boys and girls, and mainly Judge Davy and Viper and Marley. And Commander, her stepmother. And her Scottish accent is non-existent to terrible, but that's the problem, isn't it? If you've got one woman and they bring in this character and say she's going to be Scottish, you're doing her.
Yes, you need accent training if you're going to be able to do that sort of thing properly. And there's no way Filmation could afford that.
So there are two other actors to talk about. Charlie Adler.
I knew that one as well.
Now, I mentioned that he was in Bravestarr when we were talking about Tiny Toon Adventures. And who does he play in Bravestarr?
Fuzz.
That's right. He plays Deputy Fuzz, who is the main prairie person character. And I always remembered Fuzz as a character I didn't much like. It's a bit of a stupid little bastard thing. But Reggie's thoughts about the prairie people are very interesting. I shall share them with us now.
Yes, I remembered that Fuzz was there, but I didn't remember whether I liked him or disliked him or was indifferent to him. I might as well say now that I also remembered there was Evil Fuzz. I didn't remember that his name was Scuzz, but I could remember exactly what he looked like.
And I didn't remember him at all.
No, you didn't remember he existed, so there we are. And he's an evil prairie person.
And the prairie people are definitively shown as the native species of New Texas. They've always been there. They're kind of a mixture between people and groundhogs. Sometimes the prospectors find it easy to blame the prairie people for the lack of carium and all their other problems. And they do some prejudice stories in that way quite well.
And they get oppressed and their lands and their rights taken away from them just like Native American Indians. So I think that's very interesting. And in one of the episodes that you showed me, Scars and another baddie were saying to some people, you can't drink out of this water hole.
They were using a random dingo for that bit.
Oh, it was a random dingo. And Scars was basically saying, if you want to drink this water, you have to pay me. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Yes. And I said, okay, he's being evil. We know he's evil. But then if a prairie person genuinely had been using a water hole to water themselves, their family, any working animals they may have, and then prospectors come along and start drinking it, I think we should at least consider that they're within their rights to say that they require rent for it. And in the opening titles, aren't there some prairie people digging up carium for some prospectors?
Well, I was wondering about this because the prairie people do mine carium themselves, it seems.
Oh, so people are just coming along and taking their carium, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if any of those in the music are supposed to have been enslaved, or perhaps they're getting paid for their labour. They do seem quite happy, don't they?
Yes, I suppose so. If I see some more episodes, I might think of some other things. But in that origin movie, doesn't JB find Fuzz?
Yeah.
And start saying, oh, we'll have you speaking our language in no time. So they force them all to learn English. And part of the problem with some of the prairie people, including Fuzz, that makes them annoying, is that, I'm not sure how to phrase this, they can't talk properly. They're still learning English, and then they have these very high voices, and that can make sort of furry animal characters rather annoying, like I don't know if you've seen the Black Cauldron, but that thing called Gurgi was the first thing that got called a stupid little bastard thing in this house. He's sort of furry animal that can't talk properly. And Snarf is the same sort of thing. He can talk properly, but then he has to say snarf, snarf at the end of every sentence. So there you are, everyone knows how annoying Snarf is. And it's that kind of thing. And Fuzz is voiced by Charlie Adler, as we said, and he sounds like Cow if she wasn't a native English speaker.
Yeah.
And source of great amusement to Jake is that I can't really understand what Fuzz says. I think it's partly because of the poor sound quality on those American VHSs. But by the time we got to the end of the little watch through we had, I think I was getting the hang of it, actually, wasn't I?
Yes, you were getting more of his sentences. It's interesting talking about the fairy people mining Carrion. Fuzz tells JP in the origin movie he actually rescues her from the baddies by taking her underground in the middle of the desert before she's really used to the planet. That's how they first meet. Then she teaches him English. Fuzz says to her in that, fairy people are good at building stuff. And they are. They have this hammer of justice, as I say, which is a sophisticated weapon, and they fix up the town's defence systems. So they're sort of mechanical wizards, fairy people, and I guess they're able to do that because underground they have access to metal to build things and Carium to power it. That's why they need Carium. So yeah, that's Fuzz basically. There's a few episodes where the mayor tries to get Fuzz fired and stuff because he's a bit of a racist. But Bravestarr always stands up for Fuzz, and if Fuzz makes a mistake, because, he's not an experienced lawman, really, he makes up for it and learns his lessons. And he and Bravestarr have very much a sort of mentor-student relationship, like Charmin and Bravestarr the other way.
Yes, in their marshal's office set up with Bravestarr, Fuzz and 3030, they're bringing together the cultures just as in the past, cowboys, settlers in the Americas, and Native Americans have come together and made people like Bravestarr.
So Fuzz is a very important character, but he's rather annoying. Who else does Charlie Adler do?
Dunno.
Tex Hex, of course.
Oh, really?
Who sounds rather like Buster Bunny at times.
I hadn't noticed, but we both remembered Tex Hex existed and was the main villain.
What I didn't really remember about him was that he had magic powers, but that's where the hex is from.
Yes.
And that's how he manages to evade capture all the time. He can disappear in a puff of smoke, as 3030 says.
Apart from that, it struck me that he didn't use his magic powers very much.
No, he doesn't really, because they'd be a bit too powerful to fit in with the premise of most episodes.
There was this bit where he got knocked over and he was sitting on the ground and then he turned into a puff of smoke in order to stand up. We were saying, well, that's a bit lazy.
If you see early produced episodes, and they aren't at all shown in their production order, as you can see from the list on Wikipedia, if you see episodes that are produced quite early, you'll generally see Tex Hex as the main antagonist in the episode, trying to get Carium, trying to kidnap Charmin, something like that, and various members of his gang will be helping him, and the good guys will be stopping him. But he does get kind of sidelined in the later produced episodes, which is why I managed to get hold of 4 episodes on 2 videos, and he wasn't in any of them. So that was the first really trigger that made me buy more videos. I wanted to see Tex Hex. And yes, he is a memorable villain. I think he's quite well done and quite well voiced. He's certainly threatening and at times slightly amusing and, yes, memorable. I mean, if a character can't be good, being memorable is just as good in some ways. Yes, we're introduced to Tex in the origin movie as very greedy, very selfish, leaving McBride to possibly die, although he's only paralysed from the waist down, as it turns out. And the most powerful villain on the planet, who we'll talk about in a bit, sees in Tex greed, evil, and that's why he recruits him and gives him magic powers. But we see in some episodes that Tex, before he left for New Texas to get lots of Carium, wanted to make a new life with this woman he had called Ursula. And there's this episode where Ursula is coming to New Texas, and Tex and his gang are planning a big assault on Fort Carrion. And Shaman does this A Christmas Carol on Tex to make him see how he used to be not so bad and love Ursula, and now he isn't. And Ursula's coming to New Texas, and he'll want to go and attack Fort Carrion when she's in it. So Tex, from this, actually sabotages the attack, much to the surprise of his followers and the anger of his master, Stampede, who we'll talk about in just a minute. And then Rosie found me watching that on YouTube, and she had the moral segment at the end where Bravestarr and Shaman were discussing something. And you thought it was a terrible cop-out, if you remember. Bravestarr says something like, "Today we saw Tex take a look at himself and decide to do something good." And then he said, do you remember?
I can't remember the words, but I can remember the sentiment.
He said, "But he's just a character in a cartoon show."
That's right.
You know the next time you see him, he'll be just as evil as before. And then you were like, well, saw that character development then.
Yes, quite.
What a cop-out.
I must not have liked as well Bravestarr actually using the word cartoon show. Okay, they break the fourth wall and tell us a moral and know that we're there, but they should also not really realise that they're a cartoon.
I think when we come to the moral and Bravestarr says, "in today's show," that's pushing it a bit.
He should just say, "today this happened."
It's better when he goes, "seems like there's always something to learn, and today we learn."
Yeah.
But saying Tex is just a character in a cartoon show is rather disappointing.
But at least Tex, or someone, seems to have taught Scuzz to speak fluent English.
Yeah, I think it must have been Tex, because Scuzz was helping him, kind of betraying his people, right from the start when Tex was looting the planet.
Yes. So, Scuzz has the least annoying voice of all the prairie people.
So there we go, that's pretty much what there is to say about Tex. Main villain, yes, usually nearly always there in early produced episodes, being the driving force of evil, and gets sidelined a bit later. Tex's Terrible Night, that episode I was just talking about, is called, if you want to find it on YouTube. Worth a watch, certainly. So those are Charlie Adler's two main characters, really, Fuzz and Tex Hex. But he also does Mayor Derringer, Fort Carrion's mayor, who's constantly racist about prairie people and wants to get Fuzz fired. He's a bit of a blustering, vicious idiot, Mayor Derringer.
That's interesting that if there comes a time when people stop being racist about black and white and Asian and Native American, there will still be racism towards species from other planets.
Do you know, it reminds me of that Fairly Odd Parents, where Timmy wishes there's no hatred in the world or something, and everyone turns into these grey blobs, and the dentist in Fairly Odd Parents is awful, goes around saying he's better than the other grey blobs because he's greyer and blobbier. There are always going to be people doing it, aren't there, as long as there are people. But Mayor Derringer sometimes does come through and be one of the good guys, just not very often. Normally he's the kind of official, getting in the way, complicating things, and comes running to Bravestarr for help when things get really tough. Bravestarr knows that when he says to Mayor Derringer, "if you get rid of Fuzz, you get rid of me," Mayor Derringer's going to completely back off, because he knows that without Bravestarr, they're all doomed. An occasionally featured character there. One of the goodies, I suppose, but not really a protagonist. It took me a while to decide whether Mayor Derringer was Charlie Adler or Ed Gilbert, and I thought, no, he sounds like Professor Monkey for ahead of time. It's Charlie Adler. That's from Earthworm Jim.
Which we will talk about one day.
Now the other actor, main actor, is Alan Oppenheimer, who is the one, apart from the two Shimers, who came across from He-Man. And in He-Man, Alan Oppenheimer played
Skeletor?
And Man-at-Arms, Cringer, Battlecat, Merman, Buzz-Off, and many, many others. And he doesn't actually have anyone who I would call a primary protagonist or antagonist, but he has three very much secondary characters, a secondary protagonist, two secondary antagonists, those being Handlebar, secondary protagonist, and two secondary antagonists, Stampede and Scuzz.
We've talked a lot about scars already. When you showed me your videos and I was reminded that Handlebar existed, I said, oh yes, that green barman.
That's right. He runs the bar, and at times he has a sort of shop attached to it, the trading post.
Of course, the bar's a sort of Western saloon, isn't it?
He sells in his trading post, as well as sweet water, which is what they all drink, pink, and it actually comes from water cactus pods, it turns out, in one episode. He sells in there explosives for mining, and he sells dolls, which some child shoplifts in one episode, and then the evil dingo is able to have leverage over her. And presumably he sells food and toothbrushes and things like that as well.
So sort of general stores.
Yeah. He has his bar and his general store. That's the other character I meant to mention for Ed Gilbert, actually, Dingo Dan, who blackmails this child he's seen shoplifting. Because he's the most interesting Dingo, because he has the power to turn his face into a human face and fool people. Like he gets put in jail and he fools Furs into letting him out by putting on his human face and saying, Marshall says you were to let me go. Because there was a human in there too, Fuzz was supposed to let go. And that was one of the times when the mayor was coming after Fuzz and saying, oh, you're a rubbish deputy. So yeah, that's Dingo Dan, who's Ed Gilbert. But yes, Handlebar, the green guy, has a handlebar moustache. He handles the bar, and they sometimes make some interesting use of him. There's an episode on YouTube I've seen where it turns out he's a former space pirate. Someone's after him. They've all got dark pasts, these people, Handlebar and Doc Clayton, anyway.
Maybe when he became a pirate, he was rebelling against how his destiny is pretty much decided from when he's named at birth.
Yes, you will handle a bar.
And have a handlebar moustache.
But he's a very good guy, really, in this episode, where the two children from the Fort Carrion school, one of whom is Charlie Adler, sounding exactly like Buster Bunny, and the other of whom is Sue Blue, sounding like a woman, have gone off looking for excitement, trying to join Tex-Hex's gang, and Handlebar agrees to be their big brother figure in New Texas, keep an eye on them. So he's certainly a protagonist, and they usually have him handling the bar and saying various things, and he helps just to bring Fort Carrion to life in that way. Scars we've talked about a lot, as you said. I don't think there's really anything else to say about him now. And the other main character he plays, but again, like Handlebar and Scars, you don't see him that often. Secondary character, I would say, is Stampede, who is Shaman's old nemesis and rival, and has been hankering after lots of magical power for years. He's this kind of, well, he's what they call a bronchosaur, I think. And he's got some sort of robotic parts on his arms and robotic horns sort of thing.
And a moustache.
And a moustache like Tex-Hex's. When he gives Tex-Hex magic powers, he also gives Tex-Hex his own moustache, which is rather strange. And he's got these glowing yellow eyes. Yes, and he looks like this sort of dinosaur. Tex-Hex refers to him as an overgrown cow at one point when he's not feeling very friendly towards Stampede. But yes, he's the main source of evil power on the planet, and like Krang in the Turtles, you'll see him generally taking a back seat, and Tex-Hex being the main villain, Stampede being the chief villain.
Other examples of that are Complex being like Stampede, and Toadborg being like Tex-Hex and Bucky O'Hare, and also Horde Prime and Hordak in She-Ra.
That's right. I always think there isn't one like that in He-Man, which is true, but the example in that universe does indeed come from She-Ra with Horde Prime. Yes, Stampede is very like Horde Prime in some ways, with lots of flashing lights and smoke coming up. Stampede has these yellow eyes, which remind me of Horde Prime. But in some episodes, you will see Stampede just having a quick scene where he tells Tex-Hex what to do. Like in the episode called New Texas Blues, Stampede gives Tex-Hex an evil guitar to sabotage the rock festival. I guess Stampede's kind of expensive to animate, because often you see him and his mouth won't move and his eyes flash to indicate he's talking, or sometimes they do move his mouth a bit. But then he does play a bigger role in some episodes, such as one of the episodes I show Rosie, called Balance of Power, where you see Shaman and Stampede and their old enmity being renewed when Stampede contrives to steal Shaman's magic stick, which increases the magic power of he who holds it. And in that one we saw Thunderstick and Scars directly doing something under Stampede's orders without Hex being Stampede's designated mouthpiece to tell the gang what to do. And it was saying, oh, how do they know it's Stampede? It might not be Stampede. And I was saying, yes, normally if you see Thunderstick and Scars doing something, they would be doing it just for Hex. But it's one of those episodes where the goodies just are able to say, oh, it's Stampede doing it.
I don't like things like that, leaping to the correct conclusion to save time and move the episode on.
The worst one, I think, is in a He-Man episode called The Curse of the Spellstone, and there's this storm, and Man-at-Arm goes, oh, it must be the Spellstone. I mean, Jesus.
That doesn't even bother them regularly, like Stampede.
Exactly. So there we go. You don't see that much of Stampede.
And did either of us have any notion that he ever existed?
I kind of thought, yes, Hex sometimes used to talk to this big thing that had his moustache. When I may have seen a picture of them on the internet or something like that, but it really didn't stick that much in the memory.
No, I had no memory of that. I remembered that there were Bravestarr, JB, Fuzz, 3030, Scars and Hex, and that was it.
Alan Oppenheimer does, for Stampede, a voice which I say is something like approaching Skeletor, but not at the kind of level, but an evil, powerful voice like Skeletor's. And when he is in the episode, you'll often hear him doing guest characters, sounding quite like Man-at-Arms a lot of the time, which is probably something like his real voice. And he's a very talented voice actor, Alan Oppenheimer, and adds a lot to the show. I don't know if he wasn't able to give as much time to Bravestarr as he did to He-Man, but what he does do in it is certainly a valuable contribution. Alan Oppenheimer plays the robotic half of Two-Face, who you were talking about earlier. And Ed Gilbert was the living head of him. So that's the main characters discussed and talked about, and our memories of them shared. So we'll just say what we liked and perhaps didn't like about these episodes we watched recently. The first one we watched was To Walk a Mile, which I think is quite an interesting episode. And it has this Two-Face in it, who we've talked about, taking advantage of this marshal, Lucas Conway, who put him in jail a while ago, but Lucas Conway is no longer a marshal because he accidentally crippled his deputy, and he's now prospecting on New Texas, and Mark, his son, gets kidnapped by Two-Face, and consequences occur. And that has 3030 being a bit insensitive, as you say, a bit of an arse. What's with you anyway, Marshall? And then when it's explained, 3030 gets to understand it better. So do we. And one good thing about that episode is that it does make some good and imaginative use of powers. As Rosie was saying to me, perhaps Ears of the Wolf is the one that might be most difficult to write into a show organically and successfully. They make quite good use of Ears of the Wolf and To Walk a Mile. And they make some appropriate use of Strength of the Bear and Speed of the Puma as well, which does enhance the episode if they use the powers well like that. And I think you quite liked To Walk a Mile, didn't you?
Yes. It had some good characterization, I think. A good, quite engaging and sophisticated plot.
Which a lot of Bravestarr episodes don't. They just kind of stumble along and chuck in the Strength of the Bear here and there, and you think, oh, right, okay. So I do think To Walk a Mile is one of the much better episodes.
I remember now. The guy, Lucas, wasn't wanting to do things, and Mark was, and 3030 was saying that son of his seems to have more courage, and I said, well, more bravado, so I got what was going on there.
That's exactly it. Bravestarr goes, well, maybe. And then we learn the whole story. And everyone grows from the experience. And we'll next mention, because I think it takes what that episode does well and brings it a step further, we'll next mention the episode which I nominated as my favourite, which is called Fallen Idol, where one of Bravestarr's old instructors from the Marshall Academy, Jingles Morgan, is Ed Gilbert, is wanted for murder. And that's taking it a step further than, oh, I crippled my deputy for life, as Jingles has gone bad or made a bad decision and murdered someone who's on the run for murder. Bravestarr has to bring him in, which is quite hardcore, isn't it, for a cartoon?
It's a sort of lizard person he's murdered, and I bet the penalty for that is worse than killing a prairie person because they're seen as second-class citizens.
Indeed.
Whereas lizard people are seen as on equal terms with humans and other species.
On a side note, when people talk about the episode of Bravestarr that they think is hardcore, and everyone go, "Oh, what a hardcore cartoon! Look at this!" is one where there's this drug called spin, and there's this kid who dies from an overdose of it, and they're like,
"That's quite hardcore."
But I think Fallen Idol, in its way, is just as hardcore, because not a lot of cartoons would have murder as what this character is on the run for, and indeed, in To Walk a Mile, thought I killed him. As it was, I crippled him for life. They stopped short of it there. So they don't handle such situations and issues lightly, I think.
I'm just wondering now if they thought the murder of a lizard person would be more palatable for the audience than the murder of a human being.
Do you know, in the script, it's never referred to that he's a lizard person?
No, it's just in the animation.
His Imperial Trooper Solomon Bliss. I mean, that could be anything, and they've drawn him as a lizard, haven't they?
Yes.
So as not to go, ooh, murdered a person.
Yes, which is very racist, because obviously in this universe, lizard people are equal with human people, but then for the audience, they're probably not.
You see in the flashbacks of the Marshals Academy, not all the trainee marshals are human. There's a wolf thing, as you spotted. There's a slug thing that I spotted.
Yes, that's good to have all different diverse races doing it.
So they've certainly always got an eye on that sort of thing. Show what a multicultural future it is, and indeed rightly so. But yes, I do like that one with Jingles, where Bravestarr has to arrest the man who used to be his hero, outdraw him, bring him in. And Jingles has this kind of catchphrase where he goes, "Oh, I never lose," when he's doing, training boxing with the recruits and stuff. And it's a bit of fun. "Oh, I never lose." And then it becomes his deadly motto, "I never lose, kill you." And the mirroring of the two different uses of the catchphrase, "I never lose, I never lose," is very effective in that, I think. And of course, at the end, even Jingles can't deny he has lost. Bravestarr outdraws him and arrests him. And that one, what I think sets it above To Walk a Mile, is you come away from To Walk a Mile and everything's fine, everyone understands each other better, everyone's grown and learned, nobody's actually dead. But you come away from Fallen Idol, and Bravestarr has tried to get some sort of answers from Jingles about why he's turned bad. And as you see from some of his tortured facial expressions in the episode, when Tex Hex is saying to him, "Get rid of Bravestarr if you want to join my gang," he's like, "Oh, don't really want to do that, do I?" But Jingles has made this one big mistake because of this aspect of his character, which he hasn't been able to overcome, "I never lose," and that has taken him down the dark path that he's now kind of stuck on. So when Bravestarr starts demanding answers from him, Jingles is like, "I never asked to be your hero," and goes off in the prison ship. And you think, well, yeah, you kind of did though, didn't you? Not literally, but by being the good guy, popular teacher who they make a surprise birthday party for at the Marshals Academy, you were bound to be his hero, and you've let him down. And there's no avoiding that. Bravestarr learns, okay, there's no avoiding that, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good thing that Bravestarr himself is now Fuzz's hero, and let's hope future in that way.
Marshal Bravestarr, my hero, sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. So, it's certainly not a bleak end to the episode, but not everything is tidied up nicely and made us feel fuzzy about everything. You see what I mean?
I kept thinking maybe he'd come through in the end, because that's what I expect from these sorts of cartoons. And there it is, he didn't.
So it's an effective ending in that way. Maybe when Jingles has served his time and had some counselling, he could do something good again in the future. A sequel episode there could be quite interesting. I like what Bravestarr says in the moral segment. Day I learned that someone I once admired was a murderer. I hope a bad experience like this never happens to you. But I think, oh yes, so do I, Bravestarr.
Yes, but then he gives some examples of similar experiences. Someone you admire does drugs or steals or hurts somebody, I think it was.
That doesn't mean you should do it too. And he teaches us there to be true to ourselves and take the good from ourselves and pass it on to others like he's done to Fuzz, Dirty, and many other people. And that one also makes good use of 3 powers, including Eyes of the Hawk, so that's good to see. We watched an episode called Balance of Power, which I was talking about before, where Stampede steals Shaman's stick. And it's not so good, that one, but it's good if you want to see Stampede and see what his deal is, so that's why we watched it. And it makes some good use of Strength of the Bear and Speed of the Puma, but doesn't bother with the other two. So an average episode in many ways, but not a bad one if you want to see Stampede. We also watched an episode called Rampage, which Rosie enjoyed when I first got the videos.
Yes, when you first got them, I was disappointed that the show wasn't as good as it had seemed when we were younger. But then this episode made me laugh because 3030 was washing his hair, and he's a macho man, and you don't really think he would be taking good care of his mane. And Bravestarr makes a joke about where they keep the perfume and pink ribbons, and I was saying, why have they got those in the first place? And you think, 3030 is just gonna tell him to piss off, but then after he's gone, he considers putting a ribbon in his hair, and it's just rather amusing.
Oh, no! He throws it away.
Yes, and then Bravestarr goes off and does the main plot, which isn't as engaging and clever as some of the other ones we've been talking about. And in the meantime, 3030 doesn't know where he is and is worried about him and gets one of the dingoes to get him off his back by lying to him that Tex has captured Bravestarr, so then 3030 goes and smashes up the hexagon, which I think is quite funny.
It's visually amusing, and in that one the hexagon is a lot easier to infiltrate than in many episodes where it has lots of magical defensive things. And there's one 3030 goes barging in and blasts the place up with Sarah Jane. Tex and characters here don't really know what to do about it, but it's very funny.
But the other ones that you chose to show me because they are good episodes are probably better in terms of plot characterization.
That's the episode I was talking about where Sandstorm goes off on his own to get slaves for Tex. Tex says to him, "Don't be doing something without telling me first," which is also what we learn from the episode about Bravestarr going off and worrying 3030, not knowing where he was. But perhaps after that the Sandstorm decides, well, I'm going to do things on my own, actually, I'm a bit of a renegade. I've also been reminded, while talking about that episode, how Bravestarr has as one of his gadgets from the Marshals Academy this kind of red visor that pops down out of his hat. And that sometimes used to annoy me when I was young, because it seemed he would sometimes use it instead of Eyes of the Hawk to try and look at things that were far away. I thought, why isn't he using Eyes of the Hawk for that? But it's okay when they do use that red visor popping down for things like in this episode Rampage where he's doing a heat scan in this village to see if there's anyone still there, and he finds this body heat in the house and they go and investigate. So that's good use of his red visor thing.
Of course, Eyes of the Hawk actually gives him a bird's eye view, doesn't it? Which I'd forgotten.
Yes, when they remember to animate it that way, which they don't always, but they did in the episode before.
Speaking of Eyes of the Hawk, do you want to tell everybody about your Mondegreen?
Oh, God, I'd forgotten that. Yes, in Rampage, he uses Eyes of the Hawk to see a bird's eye view of all the villagers being taken away by Sandstorm, and that's proper use of Eyes of the Hawk, as well as proper use of the red thing, which is fine. But then some episodes you'll see, oh, what's that dust cloud? Oh, I'll use my red thing. You should be using Eyes of the Hawk. But when I was young, and we'd probably watched 4 or 5 episodes of Bravestarr only, and we'd seen and understood ears of the wolf, strength of the bear, speed of the puma, but we hadn't seen him use this other power that they kept mentioning in the opening sequence. And I said to my mum, "Can pigs see well?" She said, "What?" And I said, "Can pigs see well?" She said, "I don't think so, darling." And I said, "So why on Bravestarr is it Eyes of the Hog?" Because they were saying in the music, in the opening sequence, "Eyes of the Hog." And I thought it was Eyes of the Hog, you see.
Powers of hog, wolf, puma, and bear.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not very helpful in the opening sequence. I was trying to look out because they have illustrative uses of the powers. But the illustrative use of Eyes of the Hawk comes before Erika Scheimer starts saying it. So while she's saying Eyes of the Hawk, the ears of the wolf symbol starts appearing, and he turns round and hits Sandstorm, who was sneaking up on him. And I think, no, that's ears of the wolf. Where's this Eyes of the Hog? There's no Eyes of the Hog in it. But then, at last, after watching several episodes, we were able to see him close his eyes and say, "Eyes of the Hawk!" And there's this animation of the spirit animal, this bird of prey, going, "Caw, caw," and flying off to give him a bird's eye view. And I think, oh, Eyes of the Hawk. And then you notice in the opening sequence, it's hawk, wolf, puma, and bear. There's a hawk flying above him. And there is an illustration of him using Eyes of the Hawk before they actually start singing the names of the powers. So that cleared that up.
And speaking of the hawk animation, this time around, in fact, I was disappointed with the wolf animation, wasn't I? The bear gets to sort of roar and flex his muscles and show his strength, and the puma gets to go meow and run off, and the wolf just stands there. I suppose it's listening, I said.
I always liked the puma one best and the wolf one least, but yes, it is kind of standing there and listening rather than doing anything exciting like howling.
Well, the hawk's using its eyes, and the puma's using its speed, and the bear's using its strength in their animation, so I guess that makes sense, but it's just rather underwhelming.
Yes, it is. Perhaps it's part of a symptom of it being the one they find it hardest to find good uses for, just standing there listening.
Well, if you think about superhero stuff, I've thought this before, like Superman and other TV shows, you can more often think of scenarios where they need strength, speed, supervision, much more than super hearing, can't you?
So it's always kudos to a writer who's managed to get Ears of the Wolf into an episode and use it well. You were impressed with that in Walk a Mile when we first watched it. I thought, oh yeah, she's right about that. It's difficult to get it in properly. We then went on to watch Big 30 and Little Wimble, which was one that Rosie was impressed with when I first got the videos. It involves 3030 temporarily adopting this prairie people child called Wimble, and he goes to school with Miss Jenny and teaches the Fort Carrion children not to prejudge by showing them how good he is at surviving in the desert, when Miss Jenny takes them into the desert and the school bus jet crashes it.
Yes.
But it has been sabotaged by howler dingoes. It's not really her fault.
Yes, Wimble doesn't want to go to school just like the rest of us and says, I want to stay with Daddy, Daddy. And I said, oh yes, I can relate to that.
No school for Wimble. And we've all thought that, haven't we?
That's right. And I said, I don't think he's going to go back to school after this. Teacher takes her out in a spaceship and crashes it.
It's very funny. And that is what happened. That one doesn't bother making any use of anything except speed of the puma and strength of the bear, which is what a lot of episodes do. But it's still a good episode.
I quite like the plot, and of course, the children see someone who's different, and their immediate reaction is, you talk stupid, you look funny, you're not like us. All that inherent racism that children have. And then, of course, they learn that that is wrong, which is good.
It's strange, really, because they're already very much a mix, the Fort Carrion school children. There's the two little blue things I was talking about earlier, Handlebar, their big brother, as it were. There's a couple of humans, one of them's Pat Fraley, who's doing his boy voice. And there's this sort of floating light bulb thing, one of the children. So they should be used to each other's differences, really.
Prairie people are obviously just the scum of the world in their eyes, poor prairie people. But, yes, the situation arises because I can't even remember what they're doing there, but 3030 Bravestarr and Judge JB are out on the prairies, and Wimble's there with these other prairie people, and they explain that when prairie people's parents go away, the child chooses someone to look after him or her. And 3030 is not keen on this because he doesn't think that he's a sort of nursemaid person.
I ain't nobody's daddy.
That's right, but then of course he gets attached and learns some things about himself, and I'm in two minds about how much I approve of this, because on the one hand I think the prairie people's laws ought to be observed. But then what happens when Wimble's parents come to get him and 3030 has become attached? I think it's a bit hard on people who come to live peacefully on New Texas that they might end up being forced into adopting a child and then having it taken away.
I remember you were so interested by this episode when we first got it 14 years ago that you wrote a fanfic sequel to it. I can't remember exactly what happened, but it does show that it did interest you.
Yes, I don't think it was very good, and I don't remember what happened either, but I can see why I did it, because at the end of the episode they've sorted things out and they all stand around having a laugh together, and it seems like 3030 wants to look after Wimble for the next 20 or 30 years, and I think, well, what happens if his parents come to reclaim him? And another thing I liked about that one was that 3030 was being a horse to bring Wimble to school, just going about his business. I used to think when I was younger 3030 becoming bipedal was a huge deal, and there was all lightning and effects and stuff, and he only did it to get into an epic fight sequence or something. But it's not as epic as I thought, and most of the time, because the show is made by human beings who can't really imagine having a different sort of body, he's in his humanoid form to go about his business, such as wash his hair. So I like to see him being a horse and doing things in his horse quadrupedal form, and he did so to take Wimble to school and encouraged him towards Miss Jenny with his nose and that kind of thing.
I'll come and pick you up after school, as you say, to reassure your small child when you're going off and abandoning them to the wide, wicked world. The other two episodes that we watched, we've already talked about quite a bit. The Ballad of Sarah Jane, where 3030 loses Sarah Jane after he's put this powerful turbo booster in her, and it ends up in the hands of this goat child, Gurmy, who we were talking about earlier, and he wants to use it to show off to the Fort Carrium kids because he feels out of place amongst them, because he's part of this clan of goat people, the Foofters, who don't believe in using weapons and can't play at using weapons. Now I'll never get them to like me.
And part of that is that they haven't explained why he is not to use weapons and what they can actually do, so then he's curious about what the big deal is.
As JV says to Omish, Gurmy's father, your son is a child, Omish. He barely knows what a weapon is. Certainly doesn't know the kind of damage that Sarah Jane can cause. And there's a lot to learn in that episode for parents as well as children, and as well as irresponsible adults who may leave their guns lying around for children to find. But what I always noticed about the Foofters was that their takeoff of the Amish. That's why their leader, main goat character in it, is called Omish, which is quite offensive in some ways.
At the end, in the moral segment, Bravestar's telling us not to touch a gun if we find one. And I said, well, they're not so easy to find around here, Bravestarr. Of course, in America, people's parents have a gun cabinet and guns in their bedside dresser and all kinds of things like that.
So you might well find one lying around after watching Bravestarr. So it's a good episode, The Ballad of Sarah Jane, and Gurmy, as I was saying, is quite well done in his voice work for Susan Blue, and there's some interesting points to consider for viewers of all ages, and it's one of the episodes that does manage to get in all four powers. It was rather disappointing he didn't actually say Strength of the Bear when he activated Strength of the Bear in order to punch holes in the rock and make the ladder. And we only actually see the face close-up animations for Ears of the Wolf and then Eyes of the Hawk. But as I said at the time, it has managed to find a good, organic, believable way to have Bravestarr go, Ears of the Wolf. Ah, there's Sarah Jane's turbo booster beeping. Eyes of the Hawk. Oh no, there's a Foofter child with Sarah Jane. So I think it certainly deserves kudos for including all four powers.
Very
And
imaginative use of them too.
particularly for that good, imaginative, organic use of eyes and ears, which undoubtedly are the tough ones to get in. So good work with the Ballad of Sarah Jane. And the other one we watched is called Brothers Kiefer, and we were discussing that before about Bravestarr and JB and their professional and personal relationship in it. That has Alan Oppenheimer doing one of the guest baddies, although he turns out not to be nearly as bad as the other baddie. Bart, sounding very like Man-at-Arms. And yes, I was watching quite a lot of NYPD Blue at the time in 2003 when I first got that. And I thought, oh, this is just like NYPD Blue. The cop, Bravestarr in this case, and the district attorney, or judge in this case, JB, arguing about it and having dinner later. And if it was NYPD Blue, they would be in the shower together at the end of the episode. But of course, they don't go quite that far. It's a bit more subtle on Bravestarr. But it does make some good imaginative use of Ears of the Wolf. Let's listen in and hear what they're saying, the gang. Strength of the Bear, it's easy to get that in. And I really do like, and I remembered this, the basis of this, from when I was very little. I remembered the late insertion of Speed of the Puma as Bravestarr rushes to save the medical serum, which is going to save the life of the old man, Charlie, back in Fort Carrion, which the very bad baddie in that episode, Billy, is trying to hold to ransom, as it were. And you might not be expecting at that late stage of the episode, Speed of the Puma, we've already had here, Wolf and Strength of the Bear, twice each, used quite well. And then it's quite exciting. You can say goodbye to the serum, Marshal. And he chucks it. And then Speed of the Puma, and he rushes and catches it, which is a good and exciting end to the action in the episode, isn't it?
Yes, I was glad to see Speed of the Puma at the end there.
It's always good when they think of an imaginative and original use for it, or indeed any power like saving the serum. So that, of the first 4 episodes I bought, was the one I really did like, and partly was the reason I went on and bought more videos, and partly, as I say, it was because none of them had text hex in them. So yes, there we go, Brothers Keeper, another favourite of mine, and it was well worth including in our watch, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So there we go, plenty of thoughts on Bravestarr to be getting on with, certainly more than enough for now. Join us again next time on the final Sunday in September for a podcast about
Psycho.
the Psycho film series and television series of recent times, Bates Motel. There's certainly quite a lot to say about those, and it should be quite interesting. So do join us again for that. Until then, good night out there.
Whatever you are.